Shadakshi, we can start.
Okay.
Okay. Shatakshi, are we live?
Yes, we are recording and we are live and we can begin our webinar.
Shadakshi, we can start.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Shall we wait for 2-3 minutes for more people to join?
Shatakshi? Yes, I think we'll
Are we
wait
live?
7:05 and we'll
Yes,
start.
we are recording
and we are live and we can begin our
Okay. Deepak, can we have the welcome slide?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. A very good evening to everyone. We will start a webinar now. I would like to tell you that something about PRR, what is PRR and why we are organizing this webinar. So I am Purnima Agarkar, and I am a conscious citizen working towards the betterment of our rivers, rather volunteering for the betterment of our rivers through this movement, the Pune River Revival Movement. This movement has been primarily started by Jivit Nadi, but it's a citizens movement where the citizens are demanding for free-flowing, clean rivers. And the whole idea of this movement is to revive and rejuvenate our rivers for ourselves, basically. On this occasion of World Rivers Day, we are launching this webinar series where every month we will conduct one webinar focused on one of the aspects of our rivers. And this month we are focusing on floods, because as we all know that we have been experiencing floods in every city, of course, due to majorly because of the unprecedented rainfall that we are experiencing because of climate change, but also because we have encroached upon our rivers, our river beds, and our streams largely for urban development. So it's important to understand why we need to have our rivers free flowing, why we need to rejuvenate them, and them considering the urban or infrastructure development. So that's the idea of today's webinar. It will be focused on floods and its impacts and everything around floods. Apart from that, I would like to tell you that this is this webinar. This webinar will be in the form of a panel discussion, and we have 3 panelists today and 1 moderator. Our moderator today will be Shailaja Deshpande. She is the founder and director of Jivit Nadi Living River Foundation. She is a passionate, relentless activist and a great human being who's working towards reviving our rivers. And I'm glad to have her today with all expert speakers with us. So she will begin hereafter, but just a few instructions before that. We have whatever questions we have, you guys have, you can post it in the question Q&A section, and you won't be able to unmute yourself, but you can definitely add the questions, and they will be taken up once the panel discussion is over. So welcome everybody once again, and I hand it over to Shailaja Dai. Thank you.
Thank you, Purnima, and very good evening to all the experts and participants and who have joined this webinar series to understand about the floods. Yes, we do want to know more about the floods, because particularly in Pune, citizens, they are very conscious, they are knowledgeable, and they always want to do informed choices. So I welcome all the participants and all the experts. Quickly, I will just briefly mention the I will start with the introduction in very brief, but I would request Purnima and Shatakshi to share their CVs in the chat box so that we spend more time in the discussion with the experts and we have less time for such formalities. So this is going to be a very informal panel. So Dr. Jagdish, I will be starting first with you. The first question, Dr. Jagdish Krishnaswamy, currently is working with Indian Institute of Human Settlements. He is expert ecologist, but what I liked about his CV that he is initially a civil engineer and then an ecologist. Now this combination actually makes a better, because then you know or you understand what is the appropriate technology for reviving the ecosystems. So to begin my question first with Dr. Jagdish, I would just like to understand, when we learned ecology in our course, when we were learning river ecosystem, the first sentence was, for rivers, it is very important that river must flow and river must flood. So I just want to understand, what is this river ecosystem connection with the flow and floods when it comes to the health of the river as well as the river ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks, Sharjaji. This is a very important question. that many citizens and other people are interested in. And actually, the floods are an integral part of the river hydrology and ecology. So, we have a monsoonal system. So we do have floods in every river in the monsoon. And these floods perform some very important functions. Of course, floods can be destructive. We'll get to that later. But floods do a variety of things. One, it is during the rising limb, when the flows are just started beginning to rise, just before the monsoon or pre-monsoon showers and early monsoon rains, many of the organisms in the river, they pick up cues. So they have evolved with the seasonality. For example, some species may lay eggs, others may start moving towards the tributaries. There are others which will be ready for breeding. All of this is based on this seasonality, which means that you have a recession during the dry season, and then as the rains come, you have a peak in the flow. And as far as the floods themselves are concerned, not every year do you get very big floods. Every now and then you will get a very big flood. The floods do a couple of things. One is, of course, they transport nutrients and sediment from upstream to downstream. They redistribute the sediment and nutrients in the river as well as in the floodplain. Floods also allow lateral movement of the river, water, sediment, nutrients into the wetlands that are in the floodplain. So those wetlands get rejuvenated. So there's exchange of nutrient, sediment, biota between the floodplain wetlands and the main river. And also this connectivity, lateral connectivity within the floodplain, which can only be triggered by a flood of a certain magnitude, is very important for the productivity of the floodplains. So it is not as if it's only the nutrients and sediment from upstream which is sustaining the productivity of the floodplain ecosystem. It is the mobilization of sediment and nutrients within the floodplain also, which happens because of a flood, that the productivity is maintained. So this is something that we have learned in the last few decades, actually, because earlier people used to think that everything that comes from upstream is what sustains the productivity of a floodplain. But now we know that it's the processes within the floodplain also which are very important. And so these are things that also are related to the fisheries. So fisher folk actually depend on these floods for getting a bountiful catch. And so apart from the aquatic biodiversity, fisher folk and their livelihoods are also dependent on the floods. Now that's the positive part of floods. There are reasons why floods can be very damaging. And whether it's because of climate change, whether it's because of the way we have been managing our floodplains. But I just want to point out one thing, that a flowing river has a lot of energy, right? Because it's going from upstream to downstream, it's losing potential energy and it is gaining kinetic energy. So that's a huge amount of energy in a flowing river. Now that has to be dissipated. So it has to do work by carrying the sediment. It does work against the banks and the bottom of the river. And so with the work done by the river requires the sediment to be there, both in the suspended form, in the bed load, as well as in the form of sandbars and sandbanks and all. So the more resistance that these floodplain habitats and sediment deposits offer to the flowing river, a lot of that energy which is there in the river gets dissipated. Now, when you deprive a river of sediment, then what happens is there's something called a hungry water syndrome, which is basically means that the extra energy that the river has can no longer be dissipated by carrying the sediment, transporting the sediment, and working against the banks and so on. So that energy may get transferred in a negative way and destructive way to downstream farmlands and settlements and so on. So that's why having sufficient amount of sediment in the river and having regular floods which can mobilize these sediments is very important for the health of the river ecosystem.
That's fantastic, Dr. Jagdish. I think I asked you a simple question, but the amount of pointers which you gave us, that you managed to give us about the types of flows which are there into the river. You also spoke about the dynamism of the river. And you also spoke about the biota, the river ecosystem, everything. So before I move to the next question, I take the string of your biota and move to Dr. Fayaz. What is the connection of biodiversity with the river ecosystem? The river and biodiversity, people say that when the infrastructure is created, usually the manicure landscapes are created to increase the biodiversity, or a lot of plantation is done. So what is this riverside biodiversity? What it is? Why so special? Unmute, sir, please.
You see, as Dr. Jagdish very clearly mentioned, that how flood is very important. And therefore, when you look at the river system and its energy, which get accelerated through flood and brings that fluvial dynamics, there's very important role that how sediments being cut at one place and deposited at other place. I stayed and lived in Ganga floodplain. I have seen Kosi, Gandak, and worked in Chambal for a longer period of time. And I've seen this process during flood makes a river to bring many things into it. For example, when you talk about biodiversity in riverine ecosystem, you just look at the Chambal River. If it has no flood, there won't be fine sandbanks, and how gharial will breed, how turtle will go on it for breeding. So therefore, flood plays very important role in riverine ecosystem. And recent flood in Delhi also suggested many facets of it, that how if you won't see river in a holistic manner, then probably you'd be suffering. Because in my opinion, we need to understand river itself, because most of the time by looking at river, we always say that the channel, the main channel, the waterways or floodway is a river. Unfortunately, where we mistake, we have not thought about the entire river floodplain, and therefore during flood, we suffered and we are suffering and we have been suffering. Because when we look at the river, we only consider the main channel and we take out entire floodplain for our own purpose. For example, any kind of development we bring, one of them is riverfront, which I'll discuss later. When you see river itself, I personally understood looking at the various river, including recently I have seen Varuna and Assi, which makes Varanasi, and we have prepared a action plan for it. Looking at these rivers, we could understand that river is not at all a main channel, because river must not be considered as a what you call pipeline, which takes water from one place to other place. I usually speak while interacting with the student. I make a story that when I talk to an engineer and ask, sir, how do you say river? Engineer suggested, sir, river is a beautiful pipeline which takes water from one place to other place. And when I asked one real estate fellow that, sir, how do you say river? He said, Fayaz, it's a wonderful place. We get sand and boulders. Then I asked one economist that, sir, how do you say river? And he said, it's a marketable commodity, bottle it and sell in the market. So this is now ecosystem with growing population, ecosystem become kind of perception. And that perception need to be changed. And when I asked Professor C.R. Babu, legendary ecologist, that, sir, how do you say river? He kept mum for some time and then said, Fayaz, a river is a living system. So now, when I look at river, we have seen in Yamuna, I personally seen in Ganga, Kosi, and Chambal, that just adjacent to what you call the main channel, there's a place called a riparian ecosystem. And that the riparian zone is so important place which need to be seen very carefully. And then you have an active floodplain where water comes even during low flood. And then you have old alluvium floodplain. Then you have embankment at many places. Then outside the embankment, you have abundant alluvium floodplain where civilization established and get perished. Many got perished also. So therefore, when we see a river, that perspective, restoring any river become very, very easy. So when you look at the channel itself says that what are the diversity you expect? Ocular observation, when you see in a river, what you see as far as plants are concerned, quickly in main channel, you see floating and some submerged vegetation or free floating vegetation. You see quickly like hydrilla and potomegaton and many other species you see. Not only that, there are some very important species which is not visible. They are zooplankton and phytoplankton. Then you see other invertebrates, many invertebrates. Then you see vertebrates. In main channel, I'm talking about. Through my words, I'm trying to convey that when you look at river restoration, how you see these components of a river, which are very what you call connected together to make that river system as an ecosystem. Then in riparian zone, when you go closer to it, you will see that you have many macrophytes. You have small grasses, you have medium-sized grasses. For example, parspermum, we have seen that plays a very important role along the riparian zone, because parspermum is a very small grass which makes cushion, where we have seen plenty of fishes getting hiding there, breeding there, providing a space for many crabs and many other places. Then you have typha and phragmites, making it much more easier. Then you have vetiveria grass, you have Saccharum spontaneum, then you have Saccharum munja. These are the vegetation I'm talking about in the riparian zone. Most of the time, as you said, people start talking about environment, they use plantation as a tool. But in riverine ecosystem, we have seen more plantation becoming disastrous because, till riparian zone, no plantation is required at all. Because in a natural system, what you see? You see grasses, you see macrophytes especially, and there's a role to play. These macrophytes, when water comes from everywhere, before entering to the main channel, the macrophytes stops and keeps many things outside the river. And then above that, you have grasses, as I said, like vetiveria, saccharum, and many of the impreta is very important grass of floodplain. That plays another very important role with some of the, what you call, woody shrub, like tamarix. Tamarix species, one of the very important species which you see in Yamuna, Chambal, Ganges, everywhere. And then you have few more woody species which you bring. And above that, you have old alluvium floodplain. When you look at these active floodplain and old alluvium floodplain, which has combination of many components. For example, in active floodplain, you have many floodplain wetlands. And those wetlands are, if silted, you look at it, that how this siltation takes place to revive it, to restore it. Similarly, you have many grass species existing there. I always say that in ecology, we need to speak to the system. We should not look at ourselves saying that we are supreme primates. Fayaz desires that such and such a species must be planted. It never works. It fails. And during the recent flood, I have seen in Delhi that how in floodplain, what Jagdish has mentioned, one of these systems has miserably failed. Miserably failed because it came, instruction of officials got implemented on the ground without talking to the river. You must talk to the river. And how your river speaks through its fluvial dynamics. Probably Dr. Jagdish Krishnamurthy would be the right person to speak about it. But yes, we have seen that how this sediment deposition, somewhere it is taking place, somewhere it is going away. And both this exercise playing very important role in river ecosystem. And I personally understand that floodplain wetlands are so important, which is being ignored most of the time. And we don't need plantation, we need restoration of floodplain, where floodplain wetlands play a very important role. Similarly, when you go to in old alluvium floodplain, again, you have many wetlands. For example, when we see Yamuna Yamuna can be divided into two parts. One is above Wazirabad, that is from Palla to Wazirabad. It has no sewerage coming to the river, but there are many wetlands silted. Agriculture practices are rampant. Solid waste are being dumped like anything. Similarly, when you cross Wazirabad, quickly river becomes sewer, because the first sewer joins the river is historical river, that is Saibi River, which over a period of time became a Siva and now popularly known as Najaf Gadrin. So I have seen that while for making any restoration plan, we need to look at the flood pulse. Until unless you see 2 or 3 flood, you cannot understand a river. So we should not curse, because I myself kept getting flooded at my hometown, and for 15 days kept enjoying flood and looking at it, and since childhood understanding that how flood functions for river. So therefore,
Yes.
when you look at the biota, flood has a lot more to play very important role for biota, especially the islands are being created that becomes so important for reptiles and birds over a period of time. That is enormous importance for the biota of river.
Thank you. I forgot to mention and introduce you because it came in the flow, and as I told you that it's going to be an informal dialogue.
No problem, madam.
So right now, who was talking was Dr. Fayyaz, who has been working tirelessly to add Yamuna Biodiversity Park at Delhi, as well as there are another biodiversity park, which is Aravali Biodiversity Park.
There are seven now, network of 7
now
biodiversity
network has 7. Okay, so we are going to talk about it later towards the solution, more about that. But Eklavya ji, आपको मैं थोड़ा सा रुकाऊंगी, और because he spoke about the flood pulse, I want to go back again to Dr. Jagdish to speak more about this dynamics. क्योंकि आजकल क्या होता है, लोग ये बोलते हैं कि जहाँ पे बिकॉज ऑफ द क्लाइमेट चेंज और ओवर अर्बनाइजेशन और एक्सट्रीम चेंजेस इन द लैंड यूज, व्हाट एवर द रीजंस, मल्टीपल रीजंस, कहीं पे वाटर स्केर्स है, कहीं पे फ्लडिंग है. सो water scares or water flooding, इसके लिए now people are coming with the solutions of interlinking of the rivers or interlinking of the basins. So how this flood pulse and how do you connect with all these things in the river ecosystem? Could you just tell us?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, all rivers, whether they're small or big, they will have, in our climate, they will always have some flood. Every monsoon, the flood may not be of the same magnitude. It does change from year to year. Every now and then, every 5, 6 or 7 years, there will be a very big flood which will redistribute, as I said, sediment, nutrients, and also biota, create new habitats, all of that. Now, if that happens only when the floodplain is available to the river. Now, if you have encroached upon the floodplain, you have constrained the floodplain, you have built upon it, you are then in some sense creating a situation where the energy of the river has to get then cannot get dissipated through the interaction with the sediment and the banks and erosion deposition processes, or carrying the sediment, and so it may actually cause very lot of destruction. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that we have a lot of variability in, of course, we have variability in rainfall across our river basins. But we also know that these are not. There are some rivers may carry more discharge compared to other rivers. That is, and they also have different geologies. They have different levels of pollution, and in some cases they have unique biota. That means the biodiversity of Chambal or some northeastern rivers or Western Ghats rivers, they are very distinctive. So the geology is different. The channel forms are different. Even the aquatic biodiversity will be different. Levels of pollution are different. Plus, it's not as if that climate change is upon us. So it is not as if that a river which is so-called surplus. See, when they say that some basin is surplus in water,
yes,
that surplus, it is not surplus. That surplus water is performing a function. It is carrying sediment. It is reaching the sea and building our delta. And if you don't have that surplus of water, that means it is not able to perform certain functions. To say that some rivers are surplus in water and others are deficient, and therefore we can transfer from one basin to another, is ignoring a lot of things. Plus, whatever is considered surplus now, even if you buy that argument, climate change is going to be shifting our monsoon in many ways.
Right.
And so to what may be considered a surplus now, after 20 or 30 years, may be a different situation. Plus, why do you want to mix waters with different geology, different levels of pollution and different organisms? Plus, some rivers have invasive species, others don't have. When you mix all of that, you're going to be creating a lot of damage to our diverse river ecosystems. So, and now just 2-3 days back, a paper was published by a IIT Bombay group, where they have shown that this interbasin transfer of water from one part of the country to another is going to change the evapotranspiration and therefore the feedback to the Indian monsoon, and the rainfall in months like September is going to get negatively impacted in some parts of the country because of interbasin transfer. Plus, some years back, there was another study which showed that interlinking of rivers will reduce the amount of sediment reaching the Ganga-Brahmaputra delta by between 40 to 50%. So you can imagine it is already suffering from sea level rise, salinity ingress. The people there are and the ecosystems are under threat. And then you reduce the amount of sediment reaching that particular delta. Then we will have a lot of refugees. Even more than what we have already have. So river interlinking has to be thought of very carefully in terms of the impacts, and the sooner we revisit some of the assumptions on which it is based, the better it is for the well-being of all people as well as of nature in India.
थैंक्स डॉक्टर जगदीश, वेरी सिंपली एंड वेरी नाइसली एक्सप्लेन, क्योंकि ये सवाल जो है ये बार बार उठता है. आई विल बी कमिंग टू यू अबाउट RFD लेटर, मगर आपका ही जो आपने जो बात कही, एकलव्य जी, मैं आपसे यही सवाल से एक और दूसरा सवाल इसी में से आने वाला पूछना चाहूंगी. एकलव्य जी इस मेक प्याने अभियान के मैनेजिंग डायरेक्टर और सर्वा है, और इसी वजह से एक छोटा सवाल मैं आपको पहले पूछती हूँ. द फर्स्ट इज द नेम ऑफ द अभियान इज सो ब्यूटीफुल. व्हाट डज इट मीन? कैन यू जस्ट टेल द ऑडियंस व्हाट इज मेघ प्याने अभियान?
ये है मेघ पाइन अभियान.
पाइन अभियान.
ओके. हम लोगों ने 2005 में बिहार में काम शुरू किया था.
ओके.
और जिस इलाके में हम लोग काम कर रहे थे वो मिथिलांचल का एरिया था.
ओके.
हम लोगों ने बाढ़ प्रभावित क्षेत्र में जाकर ये बात करने की कोशिश की कि कैसे लोग खुद ब खुद बारिश का पानी को रोककर, अगर बाढ़ आई हुई है और बारिश का पानी को टेम्पररी रेन वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग टेक्निक से अगर रोकते हैं तो उससे उनको सेफ एक्सेस टू वाटर मिलेगा. तो उस समय हम लोग सोच रहे थे कि नाम क्या रखें. तो वन ऑफ दी पार्टनर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, उनके हेड, उन्होंने बताया कि अगर यहाँ पर मेघ पाइन अभियान रखेंगे, विच इज बेसिकली क्लाउड वाटर कैंपेन.
ओके.
तो गांव में जब जाते थे तो लोग वो मेघ और पाइन से समझ जाते थे कि हम लोग कौन सी बात करने वाले. कितना सुंदर है मेघ पाइन अभियान. तो जो डॉक्टर जगदीश ने बोला उसी के बारे में आपने भी एक स्टेटमेंट दिया था. आपने बोला था कि स्थानिक समस्या अलग होने की वजह से बिहार में बाढ़ का आना भी समान नहीं है. तो ये थोड़ा आप, कैन यू जस्ट इलैबोरेट ऑन दिस, व्हाई these are different things and why there are different reasons for the flooding? What you have been, since you have started working on that, if you could tell us. Right.
Yeah.
So I think I should thank Jagdish and Fayaz ji for giving a good introduction to what I'm going to be talking about. Purnima ji, if you can just show the photographs जो हमने share किया था आपके साथ.
Yes, sure, sir. Give me 2 minutes.
तो बेसिकली ये फोटोग्राफ्स के द्वारा हम ये दिखाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि असल में बाढ़ को कैसे लोग देखते हैं, उसको कैसे परसीव किया जाता है, उसको कैसे प्रोजेक्ट किया जाता है, और दूसरी तरफ हकीकत क्या है, और इस हकीकत पर ही हम लोग काम कर रहे हैं. तो ये फोटोग्राफ्स आप देखें, जब भी बिहार में, उत्तर बिहार में अगर जब भी बाढ़ आती है तो अक्सर हमें इस तरीके के फोटोग्राफ्स देखने को मिलते हैं. कैन आई हैव द नेक्स्ट स्लाइड प्लीज? इस तरीके के भी फोटोग्राफ्स मिलते हैं. तो इसमें देखने को क्या मिलता है कि जमीन है, जमीन में पानी बिखरा हुआ है, या कुछ ऐसी जमीनें हैं जहां से पानी नदी बीच से बह रही है, दोनों तरफ गाद भरा हुआ है सेडिमेंट से। एंड कैन आई हैव द नेक्स्ट स्लाइड प्लीज। इस तरीके का एक फोटोग्राफ आता है जहां पर एक रिवर इरोजन की दिखाती है लेकिन नदी साथ में है। तो कहने का मतलब है कि इसी तरीके से फ्लड्स को प्रोजेक्ट किया जाता है। अब इससे क्या होता है कि जो बिहार से बाहर लोग हैं या जो बिहार में बाढ़ को समझने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, चाहे वो किसी भी तंत्र में हो, वहां पर जब ये ऐसे चित्र को देखते हैं तो वो विजुअलाइज करते हैं कि बाढ़ क्या होता है। उनके लिए इस तरीके का बाढ़ होता है जहां बहुत सारा जब एक बहुत मैसिव वाटर स्केप होता है और जहां पानी भरा हुआ है, पानी फ्लो कर रहा है, जैसे जगदीश ने पहले बताया कि फ्लोइंग रिवर, और बाढ़ में पानी बह रहा है। तो उसी चीज को हम ध्यान में रख देते हैं और हम कहते हैं कि यही बाढ़ है, लेकिन हकीकत कुछ और है। कैन आई हैव द नेक्स्ट स्लाइड प्लीज। अब आप देखेंगे कि ये जो जो फोटोग्राफ्स हमने पहले आपको दिखाए थे, ये डिफरेंट टाइपोलॉजीज ऑफ फ्लड्स के थे। अब हम जब इस पर काम करना शुरू किए तो पहले हम भी 2005 से हम आप लोगों को गलत नहीं बताएंगे, 2005 से लेकर लगभग 2009-10 तक हम भी यही मानते थे कि हर एक जगह एक ही फ्लड है बिहार में। लेकिन कुछ झटके लगे जिससे हमें फिर पता चला कि हमारा अप्रोच जो था वो गलत था। हम उसको यूनिफॉर्मली नहीं देख सकते। तो हमको जो देखने को मिला, पहला था कि रिवराइन फ्लड्स, जो अक्सर रिवर साइड में होता है, दो तटबंधों के बीच में। और रिवराइन फ्लड ऐसे भी होता है जब वो बांध को टूट के बाहर निकलता है। हाँ, उसके बाद हमारे वाटर लॉक्ड रीजन है, जो तटबंध के एम्बैंकमेंट्स के जो एडजॉइनिंग एरियाज है जहां पर आपके वाटर लॉगिंग होता है। एंड वो वाटर लॉगिंग चाहे 1 महीने से लेकर आपको पूरे साल भर वो वाटर लॉगिंग रहता है। Then we have something, and this is the fourth one which I'm going to share here, is hardly talked about. And at the moment, we are doing a study here. This is a patch of area between two different embankments of two different river systems. अब इसमें बाढ़ का पानी भी है, स्मॉल रिवर का पानी भी है, और इसमें बारिश का पानी भी। But if you look at the flood description in Bihar, this kind of a typology does not exist at all. And the problems here are very different, extremely unique to the kind of problems that people face in the other flood prone areas. Can I have the next slide, please? Similarly, we have, riverine flood and river erosion where there are no embankments. We have flash floods. Now, there are flash floods of two types: flash floods where the rivers are not embanked, and there are flash floods in areas where the rivers are embanked. The impact are different. And in fact, this year, early this month, there were flash floods in a river called Bhuti Balan in Madhubani district. And that particular river is embanked, and the impact has been enormous on the habitations that are between the two embankments. So my point here is कि जब हमारे जो बाढ़ का जो स्वरूप है वो अगर अलग है, हाँ, और अभी तो हम लोग ये 8 निकाल के लाए हैं, अभी हम और कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि और निटिग्रिटीज में जाएं ताकि ये डिटेल्स हम ला सकें। क्योंकि डिटेल्स नहीं लाएंगे ना तो उससे क्या होगा कि वी विल थिंक कि हम बाढ़ के ऊपर कोई काम कर रहे हैं या कोई इंटरवेंशन करने की बात हो रही है, लेकिन हम लोगों ने उस बाढ़ को समझा ही नहीं है, बिना समझे हम वहां काम करने चले जाते। अब इसीलिए क्या होता है कि जो भी हमारा डेवलपमेंट स्कीम्स हैं, फॉर इंस्टेंस हाउसिंग का ले लें, एजुकेशन ले लें, हेल्थ ले लें, ड्रिंकिंग वाटर ले लें, सैनिटेशन ले लें, एग्रीकल्चर ले लें, ये जो भी स्कीम्स हैं पहले तो ये फ्लड प्रोन एरियाज के लिए डिजाइन ही नहीं किए जाते हैं। तो अगर फ्लड प्रोन एरियाज के लिए नहीं डिजाइन किए जा रहे हैं तो आप भूल जाइए कि टाइपोलॉजीज में कहां तक पहुंचेंगे। नाउ इफ दिस इज द सिनेरियो, then just imagine the kind of problems people staying within these entire floodscape must be encountering on an annual basis. और ये रेकरिंग होता है। फॉर अगर हमें उदाहरण दूं आप लोगों को कि फ्लैश फ्लड्स जो हैं, हाँ, हम लोगों ने एक अध्ययन किया था पश्चिम चंपारण में, नेपाल और तराई और बिहार के बॉर्डर में जो छोटी छोटी नदियां, हाँ, बहुत कितने बार हमें ये बताया गया कि वो एक छोटी नदियां जो आप बारिश अगर समर्स में जाएंगी आपको दिखेंगी नहीं वो, हाँ, लेकिन बाद में आप जाएंगे तो बाढ़ के समय में वो इतनी भर जाती हैं कि आप उसको क्रॉस भी नहीं कर सकते. And they tend to bring in floods, flash floods, almost about 30 to 40 times in a year. It's all dependent on the kind of barish which is happening on the upstream, upper catchment में जितनी बारिश होती है. Now, we need to also make one point very clear. नेपाल पानी नहीं छोड़ता है ताकि हम लोग डूबते हैं. This is basically geography. I mean, people who say all these, they should understand geography very clearly. And it is important that we use such, platforms to promote the fact that वहां से पानी छोड़ा नहीं जाता. वो पानी खुद ब खुद बह के हमारे यहाँ आता है. इसमें एक चीज और मैं ऐड करूंगा. ये इसको the previous speakers did touch about it. एक होता है ना कि एक तो हम कह रहे हैं कि challenges क्या है, तो एक सबसे बड़ा challenge हमारा है कि हम बाढ़ को समझे ही नहीं.
बराबर बराबर.
दूसरा क्या है ना कि हम बाढ़ को केवल जून से और अक्टूबर के बीच में देखते हैं.
बिल्कुल सही.
Which is absolutely wrong. वो बाढ़ का फिनोमिना होता है जून से अक्टूबर के बीच में. उसकी तैयारी और उसका प्रभाव और उसका इम्पैक्ट क्या होता है वो अगर हम उसको पूरा कैलकुलेट करेंगे तो फॉर मी एंड अकॉर्डिंग टू माय ओन अंडरस्टैंडिंग बाढ़ का जो एक फिनोमिना है वो 12 मासी है. इट्स एन एनुअल थिंग. सो इफ वी हैव टू इंटरवीन, say for instance, if we have to look at drinking water or if we have to look at sanitation, तो हम केवल वो 5 या 4 महीने को देख के नहीं कर सकते क्योंकि हमको समझ नहीं आएगा कि इम्पैक्ट क्या होता है. हम वही केवल देखेंगे कि पानी भरा हुआ है. अगर उसके इम्पैक्ट को देखना है then it is important that we go beyond when the floods recede and then we look at the impact as to what is happening. So हमारे साथ सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम यही है कि हम लोग बाढ़ को जब बाढ़ में जब काम करने की बात करते हैं या बाढ़ अफेक्टेड लोगों की बात करते हैं तो वी डोंट ब्रेक इट इनटू 3: प्री, ड्यूरिंग एंड पोस्ट. And this is something which needs to go in very strongly, that whosoever wants to come and work needs to understand floods. And the other thing is, whosoever promises that we'll do away with floods is nothing but hoodwinking us. And I hope no one even attempts to create a scenario जब बिहार में वो कहेंगे कि अब बाढ़ आएगी नहीं. कॉमन सेंस की बात है. अगर अलूवियल फ्लड प्लेन्स में अगर बाढ़ से लोग इतने खफा थे तो यूपी, बिहार, बंगाल, असम के फ्लड प्लेन्स में लोग जाके क्यों बसे? क्यों आज उसकी डेंसिटी इतनी ज्यादा है? लोग बेवकूफ नहीं है. So it is important that we should stop making people look like fools. So the point again is that and the other thing is that हम लोग जब जाते हैं ना, the third challenge is when we go to the community or go to the region to understand floods, हमारे दिमाग में इतनी सारी बातें घुसी हुई है ना कि जब सामने वाला जो त्रासदी झेल रहा है वो हमें समझाने की कोशिश करता है, we are totally cut off कि नहीं. I mean, how did we talk about typologies? Only because of the fact that we realized that we were doing some mistake. The impact of our work was very different across these typologies, wherever we worked. And that was a question that we raised within ourselves. And then we went on to meet the people and they told us in terms of कि look, अब उनकी भाषा अलग थी. उनकी भाषा को हमको समझ के ये typologies में हम आए. हो सकता है ये कुछ दिनों में ये typologies के नेम ही चेंज हो जाए. There's something else which will come in. And last but not the least, I think the fourth point which I want to make in terms of challenges is that हम लोग ना nuanced approach नहीं रखते हैं. अब हम लोग की ना generic expressions बहुत है हमारे में. For instance, we would say flood affected population. Okay? Flood affected communities. Now this whole concept is totally warped. And why do I say this? अगर कोई उत्तर बिहार में जाके देखे तो बड़े आराम से ये कह सकता है, और कुछ समय वहां बिताए तो वो बिल्कुल आराम से ये कह सकता है कि इट्स बेसिकली द women, the adolescent girls, children, elderlies, and the challenged people who are the ones who have experienced the entire flood cycle. And why so? Because majority of the men, they tend to migrate, and once they migrate, that is how the household is running.
Absolutely.
So who are the flood managers of Bihar? The flood managers of Bihar, for me and what I have seen, are the women. Now, when we get into a kind of a space where we are trying to understand floods, if we don't get into the nitty-gritties, if we don't look at the impact from a very decentralized focus, we don't look at how floods is impacting women, in what different ways. And again, I'll bring in a point here in terms of pre, during and post. ये बहुत जरूरी है.
Yes, yes.
बाढ़ में केवल पानी नहीं आता है, बाढ़ के साथ बहुत कुछ आता है जो हम लोगों को समझने की जरूरत है. And unless and until we go in for nuanced understanding, हम कुछ भी कर लेना, it is going to be catastrophic.
Very true.
And then we tend to generalize the outcome, saying that, so I am not sure that these challenges have been there for a very long time. And it is not a rocket science. Rocket science is not required to address them. So the point remains is, why are they not being addressed? So I'll stop here. I'll come back later.
Yes. Thank you, Eklavya ji. Thank you so much explaining. क्योंकि जो ground के ऊपर काम करता है ना, उसका experience अपने आप आ जाता है, वो अंदर से आता है, उसको और कोई बताने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती है. So very well explained. This is and I'm happy that the participants are listening to this. And Shatakshi and Purnima, I would like to have 10 minutes more from these experts, because the conversation is happening so interesting. I have to bring them to the solutions, because we have now seen the challenges and I have to understand the solutions from each of them. And then can we open for the question answers? Okay, thank you so much. Since Eklavya ji started with this conversation about the nuances and nitty-gritties of the floods, क्योंकि flood ये सिर्फ flood के महीनों में नहीं होता है, it's much more than that. So Dr. Jagdish, I just want to throw this question to you. What are the root causes? What exactly is happening, and whether it is the infrastructure, whether there are interventions, or what it is? Unless until we go to the root causes, then are we disturbing the flows? What is exactly happening?
Well, we have done so many things to our rivers that apart the typology that Ecological mentioned, I would just like to add one more thing. We are seeing in recent decades evidence is mounting, and people like Himanshu Thakur of Sandrup, they have done tremendous work on this. That human caused floods from release of dam water,
yes,
is also happening. So just recently, a few days back, last week, there were floods in Gujarat, which was because of release of water from the dam. And you will often find that the explanation given is that there was heavy rain. Heavy rain happens in catchments in certain seasons, yes, but the sudden release of water from a dam can cause devastating floods, often without warning to downstream people. And so this is one more. It has happened in the Krishna River also some years back, when Bansagar Dam released water, when it was not raining in Bihar, but the Bansagar Dam, which is a Son River. Son is a tributary of the Ganga, and there were floods in Bihar. And in fact, the peoples and government of Bihar also mentioned this as a concern. So we really need to relook at the way we are managing our dams and reservoirs. Apart from trapping sediment, they are also now and because of climate change, we are getting more extreme rainfall. All of that is definitely happening. So that means the manner in which we have to manage these dams also has to change, which means that you must allow buffer in the reservoir for incoming flows, and you do not at the last minute have to release a lot of water. And we have seen a lot of devastating floods where people, livestock have been killed, a lot of damage to infrastructure and settlements because of release of water from dams. And so this is, so which means that dams are no longer a panacea for so-called flood control. We are seeing a lot of floods in river basins which have got a lot of dams.
Yes.
So we must recognize that dams are as much of the problem as they are part of the solution. Obviously, we cannot do away with them. They have served useful purposes in terms of irrigation and many other things during the Green Revolution and subsequently. But now, after several decades of experience, we now know much more about how dams and reservoirs are influencing the enhancing the risk of floods downstream, and also changing the sediment dynamics of the river downstream. So we must learn from that, and we must have a new way of managing these reservoirs, especially because climate change is definitely changing the manner in which rainfall events are happening, whether it's in Uttarakhand in the Himalayas or whether it's in other parts of the country. We are seeing heavy amounts of rain falling in short amounts of time, and then you have many rainless days intervening. So the climate change is changing the nature of rainfall, and so we must take that into account while managing these dams and reservoirs. So that's one thing that I just wanted to emphasize, and also one thing that has become clear is that the floodplain is, you have floodplain will not always be right. It has sediment, it has got wetlands, it will shrink and swell. It has a certain area that, for example, will not always be occupied by water. A big flood will happen once in some years, but the water will find its way in the floodplain. So if you think that the floodplain is something where you can build permanent structures, where you can have economy and livelihoods or jobs based on these permanent structures, then you are exposing these people to high risk of damage and possibly even death and so on. So I think that we need to have rethinking about what type of economy, what type of livelihoods are compatible with the floods, and also early warning systems so that people can be moved out of the vulnerable areas and exposed areas in time, because we do know that we can't change the river dynamics overnight. A lot of people are vulnerable, whether it's because of channelization in urban areas or even elsewhere because of embankments, because of many other things. So we have to warn people and also design ways and means where people can actually benefit from the bounty that floods bring. Now, that's a tall order. I mean, that's how people used to live in floodplains, through fishing, through navigation. In fact, in Bangladesh, I have heard of very good examples where you have mobile boats and many other clinics. Even the water and sanitation is being planned for people living in floodplain areas. I think we need to also think about what sort of development is compatible with the floodplain ecology and hydrology, and what new economies that we can build. There are lots of traditional economies, and then there are also possibly new opportunities that we must look at in the floodplain. These are very productive parts of our country. They can produce a lot of bounty in terms of both agriculture, fisheries, and many other filtering of water, providing drinking water, providing navigation, tourism. There's so many opportunities that floodplains, and culturally very important as well. So we need to have a complete rethink on what does living in the floodplain and with floods means, and what we can do to change the types of development that are compatible with floodplain dynamics.
That's great. So, Dr. Jagdish, you spoke about the management of the dams should be relooked. then the livelihood generation, the green jobs, and there are multiple other things, or early warning systems, creating some early warning systems, all these things. And basically you are trying to focus more on the creating or keeping the rivers as natural as possible, keeping the rhythm of the river, whether it's floods or flows, to be as natural as possible. So I will move to Dr. Fayyaz for this question, that recently there were floods in Yamuna, and Yamuna Biodiversity Park actually acted as a sponge for the area around Wazipur and those locations, which we read in the paper. But kindly tell us what exactly this Yamuna Biodiversity Park actually worked as, how it balanced between the community's safety and the conservation of the areas. Please.
Actually, Biodiversity Park, in fact, when you look at the Biodiversity Park, it is not collection of plants. Usually, Biodiversity Park being perceived across the country, I have seen, we were the first time Professor C.R. Babu brought this concept of Biodiversity Park, and Yamuna Biodiversity Park was the first park to be established in Delhi in a joint collaboration with Delhi Development Authority and Delhi University. Actually, Biodiversity parks are a system, a blue-green infrastructure in urban center, where we bring what you call established forest community with the help of assemblage of species to create functional ecosystem through native plant species. Actually, it is very important to understand that when you look at the floodplain itself, I'll come back to see that how can we see a river? Because defining a river and its requirement, because a river is a system, it requires many things, and that system needs to be seen. And it can only happen because many people laugh at me, what Ecological was talking, many things, wonderful things he brought, because he's observing it. Because when I say that until you speak to river, you cannot understand the river. Recently, one of the media person asked me that, Fayyaz, why we are not creating two, what you call RCC wall in River Yamuna, and the floodplain can be sold out. It's so expensive land in Delhi. So I simply said,
Dr. Fayyaz also elaborate, because Eklavya spoke about the embankments, and now you are coming to the point. So we really would like to understand that.
So I said, sir, you have given wonderful line to me. Agar aisa karoge, to apne naale mein doob maroge. This was my response. Apne hi sewage mein doob maroge. Because river, when Jagdish talked about surplus water, here we see that how river act as a, what you call, a system which takes away, drains your, what you call, surplus water to ocean. That is very important. And therefore, when you define a river, you see that how a tiny channel comes from top hill down in a narrow channel. Then you have huge floodplain, which is bringing tributaries. You have subsoil aquifer, you have deep aquifer, you have rainwater, making that what you call channel very wide. And then it becomes a huge river by the time it reaches to Delhi. But what it says floodplain, it says tributaries. It talks about entire, in fact, catchment area. So until unless we look at entire catchment area, managing flood, managing floodplain, managing river would not be possible. So I'm trying to bring you some points, because in a recent past, a new concept has come into existence that is known as riverfront development across the country. And recently I was in Patna, and where with my friend from Central University of Bihar with a lot of his students, some engineers were also there. I was walking from Anta Ghat towards Gai Ghat. And when I asked engineers, sir, what you made, what is this structure? He said, sir, it is a riverfront. So when I asked that why you have made it, sir, it's a beautiful place. Aaiye baithte hain. So we reached there, actually. We went there to see that how it functions. When I went there, we sat down for some time. Then I requested, sir, can you show me river? He started looking at river, trying to find out river from the river front. And finally, he came to the first water of river front. That was nothing but sewage. So then I asked, sir, while making it, did you speak to river? He had no answer. So when you look at the riverfront development, we different, because it's a concept, it's a perception. Because I have seen that many people came out with its definition. Now, finally, NGT suggested that any development outside the floodplain, outside the embankment, can be considered as riverfront development. But it is not happening. Where it is happening? It is happening inside the the active floodplain. When you look at the Ahmedabad, you look at Lucknow, you look at Patna, which I have experienced.
Look at Pune, sir. Look at Pune.
Pune, sir. Pune, madam, मैंने देखा नहीं. कुछ फोटो भेजिए.
आइए हम लोग आपको invite करते हैं देखने के लिए.
Madam, when I seen, as I told you, that there is different perception how you see riverfront development. There is a perception of real estate fellows. There is a perception of tour agency. There is a perception of infrastructure development. There is a perception of planner. I always say, if any planner is listening to me, please forgive me. I always say that any river of the city is dying because of bad planning. And sometimes I go and visit SPA in Delhi, and I say the same thing. Why I'm telling you, when you look at it, everybody has, when talk about river, everybody talks about their own plan, that how floodplain can be sold out. Because most of the time, when you see, as I said, a river being seen as a main channel, and most of the time, other than main channel, the entire area, government anybody wants to utilize it, unfortunately. And that we have seen in Delhi, that how shrunken floodplain created havoc. And when you brought multiple flyover and bridges without looking at the capacity of floodplain, now things are over. Still, we are not thinking that how we can make it no-go zone. So when you look at the riverfront, where we have seen the riverfront is nothing but, in sense of ecology, it is an ecological disaster. It is a catastrophic, because in riverfront, there is no ecology in it. Most of the time I see that from riverfront, you see only sewage. Riverfront has been made to discharge sewage peacefully, carefully, happily. Then what you see, the solid waste can be easily dumped in your riverfront. Beautiful riverfront one side, entire area is concretized. There is no soft embankment. How the biota were interacting with the shoreline, all gone. So we have given a suggestion that how do you see riverfront? As I said, that NGT has already suggested that any development, any infrastructure development must be outside the embankment. For example, in Delhi, roads and embankments are very clearly marked. So you go out from those roads and embankment to construct anything. We have suggested that between a river and your riverfront, you must bring some buffer. And that buffer, we have suggested that Biodiversity Park would be best model to be brought between, so that river and riverfront can be interacting in a way that river system will be functional. But nobody is ready to accept it, because it would be, you have to work hard to bring it. Nobody is ready to accept. So therefore, we have seen that how riverfront development across the country become a tool to sell out all floodplain of the river to real estate. And you don't allow river to meander. You don't allow river to play with in its floodplain. As Dr. Jagdish has already said, that how flood plays very important role by making riverfront for, in the name of controlling flood, you are bringing disaster in terms of biodiversity. I tell you. So therefore, riverfront is a catastrophe. And unless we reconsider it through by giving ecological inputs into it, the riverfront development must be stopped. In India, I must tell you, if it's something of that sort happening anywhere, people must sit on dharna. to stop it if you love your river. Otherwise, it will give you beautiful, colorful riverfront. And when you look at your riverfront, there won't be river. River will go far, far away. What I'm seeing in Patna nowadays. So, as far as riverfront is concerned, we need to consider it that even though we are looking at this development, we must looking at this development as a part of blue-green infrastructure, and where we need to see that how floodplain should not be harmed. It should be part of restoration plan of floodplain. If it is outside the floodplain, people come outside the floodplain, outside the embankment, you stand there and see restored floodplain where you have water, you have a floodplain wetland, you have a grassland, you have riparian forest community interacting with each other.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fayaz. I will count Eklavyaji last question of the solution, and I have to open this platform to the question Q&A, and few minutes for Dr. Jagdish to show the photographs. So एक special जो ये अभी जो दोनों ने बोला उसमें कवर नहीं हुआ, but I found it very interesting when people, though you say कि the flood start from a much before time, still when it floods, people from Bihar suffered from as simple as basic hygiene of going to the toilets. And आपने एक बहुत अच्छा अभियान शुरू किया था, which is about urine diverting dry toilets which were installed. और मैंने भोजपुरी में ये वीडियो फिल्म सुनी, उसका मैं मतलब इतना ही समझ पाई कि इवन जब भी बाढ़ भी आता है तो भी हम लोगों को कोई तकलीफ नहीं हुई. Could you just tell the participants, because this is a concept which was not touched during our conversation, and I feel that people must know, because this is part and parcel of hygiene where flood affected people really suffer badly from.
Thank you for asking me about Faidaman Shauchalaya. So we call it Faidaman Shauchalaya.
Faidaman Shauchalaya.
So the translation is beneficial / productive toilets.
Okay.
So the fact that we have been largely working on the issue of groundwater in North Bihar since 2005. And I would not be wrong to say that we were the first few organizations to even attempt to work on the issue of groundwater in North Bihar.
Yes.
उस समय biological contamination का बहुत बड़ा issue था, and हम लोगों ने सोचा कि ये उस समय single pit latrines होते थे या open defecation होता था, तो हम लोगों ने सोचा कि let's kind of talk about different technology अगर कुछ है तो हम लोगों को इकोलॉजिकल सैनिटेशन के बारे में विश्वनाथ ने हम लोगों को इंट्रोड्यूस किया. एंड दिस वाज समवेयर अराउंड 2008, एंड वी स्टार्टेड वर्किंग ऑन दिस इशू फ्रॉम 2008 एंड वी कंटिन्यूइंग टू वर्क टिल नाउ. इनिशियली वी फेस्ड अ लॉट ऑफ फेलियर्स बिकॉज हम लोग, एज आई सेड कि वी वर नॉट एबल टू फिगर आउट कि कौन से फ्लड टाइपोलॉजी में कैसा टॉयलेट्स होना चाहिए. एंड टुडे वी आर वेरी क्लियर इन टर्म्स ऑफ कौन से फ्लड टाइपोलॉजी में फायदेमंद शौचालय का डिजाइन क्या होना चाहिए, उसकी कॉस्ट क्या होनी चाहिए. सो द पॉइंट इज दैट वी थॉट दैट सैनिटेशन, मोर एंड मोर वी गॉट टू नो अबाउट द कम्युनिटीज. हम लोग वी रियलाइज कि जब ये टेम्परेरीली डिस्प्लेस भी होते हैं ना, तो खासकर महिलाएं एंड किशोरियां, they have horrible experiences of accessing sanitation.
Yes.
So this was what we kind of talked about. So this is nothing but an ecological sanitation, as you rightly talked about. It's a dry toilet, urine diverting dry toilet. इसमें हम लोग, whenever you know what the catch is, that एक तो technology है. Now the technology has to be made absolutely appropriate to the flood typology.
Yes.
तो हम लोगों ने फ्लैश फ्लड प्रोन एरिया में भी बनाया है, और हम लोगों ने रिवराइन फ्लड प्रोन, गंडक के पेट में हम लोगों ने इस टॉयलेट को बनाया है.
Wow.
And it has now, it's almost about 5-6 years, and the toilet has encountered almost 4 floods, and it's still standing tall. And I would say that anyone from the participants or any one of you who are interested to go and see, the name of the village is Naya Tola Bishambarpur, and this is in Paschim Champaran district. I can share all the details. it is worth because this is what is required.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, can you imagine that the sanitation technology being promoted in that area is something similar to what is being promoted in South Bihar? I mean, or what is being promoted in Rajasthan? I mean, come on. I mean,
This is, yes.
a non-technical person like me can also figure out. So it's very easy for the technical minds to say that this is not the right way to go about.
Yes, yes.
So similarly, our whole idea in terms of solution, ek hum logon ne demonstrate kiya. Similarly, we had demonstrated flood resilient dug wells, especially in areas jahan par floods aate hain aur jahan arsenic contamination tha. So we had done that as well. Now we are kind of promoting this whole concept of flood resilient habitat, where we should be looking at housing, we should be looking at education, health, drinking water, sanitation, livelihood. Why can't, and we have, specific program schemes for each of these thematics, each of these verticals. Why can't we bring them together and demonstrate through the government that, that these are flood risks? Because as I said earlier, we cannot do away with floods. No one should even imagine doing away with floods. So why not also start working on something which is futuristic in terms of flood resilient habitat?
Great, great, Eklavya ji. I think I will stop. But Dr. Jagdish, if you could show your couple of slides for the audience, and then Purnima, is it okay? Shatakshay, we open for the Q&A?
Yeah, I'll quickly go through some of the slides, and it will just build on whatever Fayaz and Eklavya and I have been talking about.
Yes,
yes. Things together.
Great.
Yeah.
Give me a moment, I'll share the slides.
Yeah.
So that will be really great that if you could summarize whatever you all three were talking about.
Yeah.
That will be great.
Yeah. This is just to show. That the rising limb of the river. In a year, and you can see different types of lines here. See,
yes.
Every year the floods will be of a different magnitude and a different spread. So that's what this is illustrating, and it's also showing that whenever there's a rising limb, as the river flow is going up, there are certain fish which will reproduce, and certain other fish which will do other things. Other organisms will be doing. So they take the cue from this, and that's why the nutrient fluxes, thermal regime, temperature of the river water, everything, habitat complexity, the connectivity between the floodplain and the main river, also the dispersal of fish and migration, and also even the dry season provides opportunities for certain species of fish to breed also. So it's not that you only require high flows. The low flows also play a very important role in the ecology of the river. So we can just go to the next one. I would like leave it for the. It's going to take a lot of time, but this just shows that there are 4 principles of lateral connectivity, longitudinal connectivity, habitat complexity, and also natural regime can discourage invasion by invasive species. Also, the spawning and recruitment. All of this is dependent on the different types of flows that we have in a river. Next. And I just want to show you, look at the magnificent habitats created by the flowing river, the sediment that it's carried. And these are the same sediment deposits that also help dissipate the energy of river when it is there's a flood. You can see that ghadials and freshwater turtles, they have to bask here. Many birds breed in these islands. People also sometimes they cultivate watermelons and other things in certain rivers. So these habitats are very important actually, both for nature as well as for people. Next. And look at this is the Vikramshila Dolphin Sanctuary area. This is the Ganga. You can see the oxbow lakes. You can see how look at the complexity of the different types of flow systems that are there, and all the deposits that are there. you have within the river channel itself, you can see many types of habitats and different deposits. And this changes from year to year. Next. Just to show how much the river has moved from one year to another, different years. And then, this entire area should be seen as a very dynamic system, and not within the year, but also between years. And you have to look at it as a dynamic over space and time. And only then you can minimize the exposure and risk of damage and so on. If you can understand these dynamics, then you can have certain types of development, which will also give you a lot of productivity, a lot of jobs, possibly. Our imagination has to take advantage of the bounty that floodplains and the floodplain rivers provide us. So we have to definitely because we cannot do away with these. There's no way you can do away with it temporarily for some time. That's a false sense of complacency. The floods will come eventually. So
yes.
Next. I just want to show what we are doing to our floodplain, wetlands, and look at the type of embankment. You will not find even a turtle which is living in this pond will not be able to find a place to bask. You have completely destroyed the natural habitat and created. So this is what Fayaz was talking about, riverfront development. Same thing here has been shown in a wetland. So it's the same thing. We have concretized the sites. There is no opportunity for sediment and water move in and out of the system. There are no opportunities for birds and turtles and to actually bask and perch and so on. Next. Yeah, I just want to show that a lot of invasive species are coming in. This is the red-eared slider, and if we think about the number of invasive species of fish and even turtles and so on, which are entering our waters, that's another reason why we shouldn't be thinking about large-scale interlinking of water, because then you're also going to be exchanging these type of invasive species as well. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm going to end here. I'm not. I think if there's any. I think this was the last slide, right? Yeah. I just want to show. This is a smooth-coated otter. This was in an island in the middle of the Ganga. This is a photo I took many years ago. And this island, without this island, this species such as the smooth-coated otter, which is sleeping very happily here in the middle of the afternoon, turtles, birds, they cannot actually persist in a river ecosystem. The reason why the Vikramshila Dolphin Sanctuary is so productive is because of the complexity of the habitats that it has. Both, and it benefits fisher folk as well as the ecology of the river.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all the experts. I think this is the last, which...
Yeah, this is just to show, this is for the benefit of, just to show that in regulated river systems, I'm just showing you the river channel, the overbank flows, monsoonal flows, low flows, they all play a role. You can see the role of riparian vegetation and the livelihoods that people are deriving both in the main river as well as in the deltas and estuary. So we have to look at the river as a complete whole, from the mountains, from where the river originates, all the way to the seas and oceans where it meets and mixes the freshwater with seawater, sediment and nutrients. We have to see it in its entirety, and we have to think about new ways of living with rivers.
Wow, this is a great and most important slide, and probably whatever you all spoke about is in this slide. It explains and it just tells, you don't need to say anything more. I feel this is fantastic. Great, Dr. Jagdish, and all of you. Thank you so much. Shatakshi and Purnima, over to you now.
Thank you to all the panelists, and of course to Shailujat also for bringing this discussion alive. It's very difficult. It can be very difficult to understand floods and the rivers and why we are not able to manage it yet, even despite knowing that the river floods every year and very frequently. It's in the nature of the river. So since we were talking at the very end about the biodiversity of the river, the very first question is also related to that. This is for Dr. Jagdish. Dr. Jagdish, could you tell us how the flood pulse is related to fish migration and fish production in the wetland ecosystem? This, I think, is particularly also in reference to North Bihar, because the person who has asked the question says he has seen this happening in North Bihar.
Yeah, yeah. So some of the, not all floods are able to trigger a huge this pulse, in terms of productivity. There are certain types of floods which happen once in some years that can really give you a bountiful. So there are, of course, fishing happens every year, but fisher folk know that there are some years where, because of the flood pulse, because of the redistribution of nutrients and sediments, the entire floodplain gets rejuvenated, and there is a bountiful catch both in the floodplain wetlands as well as in the main river. So it benefits both the capture fisheries as well as the overall ecosystem of the river. So and I think that this is something that we need to really think about. That how do you have a sustainable way of looking at, for example, capture fisheries, because a lot of the fish now that people are consuming in India comes from aquaculture. It is not coming from capture fisheries. So we need to develop a stake in capture fisheries, which means the fish which are caught in free-flowing stretches of rivers. And of course there are other things that are also, for example, there are some of these floodplains are very scenic. They have a lot of productive agriculture also, and so we need to really think about how the flood pulse itself can be, in some sense, since it happens every few years. It can be a way of adaptive management of the floodplain. That means that you adapt to the changes in the changes in the floodplain, in terms of new channels being formed, new deposits, erosion somewhere else. Then people will have to be adaptive to that. So you can't expect that the productivity or the ecology of one particular stretch of river will remain the same year after year. It will shift to some other part of the river, right? So then your entire floodplain needs to be considered as a single unit in terms of this interplay, which means that you cannot assume that one stretch of a river, 1 kilometer stretch or 5 kilometer stretch of a river can be managed in isolation. You need to think about a much larger riverscape. And that's where the flood pulse is very important. It's very important in the Ganga. It's important in the Gandak and others. Unfortunately, the flood pulse is not able to perform its functions whenever there are embankments, or when there are sometimes there are other obstructions. Plus, there are also problems with the dams and barrages. So, in some sense, we have diminished the role of flood pulse in certain types of rivers over time. But it still remains in other rivers, and we need to think about creative ways of adapting to that.
Thank you. So the next question is in a similar vein. It is for Ekalavya ji. Does the location of the village settlement also affect the flood impact?
What I would say is, I mean, this is again quite a generic, difficult to answer this generic question, because if you go and have a look at the habitations, which are, say, in different flood typologies, what I have experienced is that the people, they make an effort to keep themselves safe. So you will have very different, kind of housing design that people adopt, whether it is in the flash flood prone area, whether it's in a riverine flood prone area. So I think that kind of an understanding does exist within the community, where they know that the floods are going to come in, and based on the floods, they tend to look at how safe can they be as far as the housing is concerned. And I think I got the question right. Kindly let me know if this is exactly what the question was all about.
Yeah, I think that was what the person who was asking the question was referring to. But if anyone else also, Fayaz ji, Shailaja, if you also want to add, or Jagdish, so if you want to add to this, we can definitely have some more about how floods are impacting, say, in the city, in the rural areas, human impact of the flooding.
You see, already everything has been told. But I have seen that as far as livelihood is concerned, flood plays very important role, because this year I have seen a couple of new fish like bata fish. There is one of the labio species, which first time I have seen in the Yamuna Biodiversity Park active floodplain of phase 2. And it itself shows that how, and that is native to River Yamuna. And it is reported, it has very wide distribution from Bangladesh to all together, how River Yamuna brought it through Ganges to Yamuna Biodiversity Park because of high pulse of flood. The flood intensity was so high that some of the new fishes came. Not only the diversity, but density also increases. That's very important to see that when flood recedes, the sediment, shallow sediment got deposited, and I have seen the fish like Puntius increase so much, what we call as putti mach, has so much high. Shrimps density is so high that it is a bountiful catch for fishermen folk. So therefore, flood also brings huge livelihood support. There is no doubt in it. Not only that, many floodplain wetland which were dried, which were heavily silted, now I have seen at some places it is cleaned, and now plenty of water is there, because I understand that floodplain wetlands are very important for a pinch period when place like Delhi, Yamuna has no water. If we have many floodplain wetland, restore floodplain wetlands, which can store substantial amount of flood water, that helps river during pinch period to provide some of the water to regulate the flow. Getting ecological flow in Delhi is very difficult, but still it gives some idea. Not only that, this floodplain I have seen acting as a nursery for river. During flood, it not only brings water, but it brings many propagules, many fish, many insects. Even though flood recedes, all these grow over a period of time. When next year flood comes, it goes to main river channel, act as a nursery for river. So it is floodplain, wetland, grasslands play very important role in floodplain. When we look at any kind of restoration, we must consider all these components.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is related to climate change. There's a slight a few lines before. Climate researchers had informed nearly 15 years ago about the changes in rainfall trends and that there will be an increase in extreme rainfall events. So why are the climate change impacts not being taken into account in planning interventions on the rivers yet? And there's another part. Why is there a disconnect between national and state climate action plans and infrastructure planning? And this is very important, I feel, going forward. This question and the next part is also by Dr. Priyadarshini Karve. On what platforms can we raise these issues to bring about a change in policy thinking? I think all of the panelists, it would be nice to hear from all of you about this important question. So, Dr. Jagdish, would you like to start with this answer on climate change and impact on the rivers?
So climate change, different regions of the country are being impacted by climate change in different ways. And we can see, for example, the devastation in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, where actually, the structures which are built right on the river, they may have lasted for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Some have lasted for 40 years, but now they've been, the river has during the recent rains and floods, it has destroyed many of that, which means that the type of rainfall that we are receiving, we must take cognizance of that. And just like floodplains are also areas where we need to rethink about what we can do and cannot do. Even in the Himalayan river areas, we must have special zoning of what can be allowed in terms of infrastructure, and also redesign the infrastructure so that you don't lose a whole lot. You can have infrastructure that can exist for many months in the year, which can then be demobilized, and then you don't expose that to the flood, and you can come back and do other things once that its season has changed. So there are ways in which one can have zoning of the river banks. The other thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, climate change is impacting the upstream areas of many of our dams and reservoirs, and we need to then consider how to manage those reservoirs. Early warning systems upstream of the reservoirs, consider ways and means of releasing water at earlier stages instead of sudden releases at the last minute. We need to may have to sacrifice some amount of the storage of the water. It is a trade-off, whether it is for hydropower or irrigation, but it is going to be something that we have to adapt to some of these climate change challenges. They're not going to go away; they're going to intensify, and so I think that there are no easy ways, because this is something that is very difficult for us to change, right? Climate change is upon us. Rainfall regimes are changing, and the water holding capacity of the atmosphere has increased because of it being warmer. The rates of the acceleration of the hydrologic cycle has happened because of the higher temperature, and so we now need to adapt to these different climatic regime, and not look at the conventional infrastructure. Our water management infrastructure will have to also adapt, get redesigned, both in cities as well as elsewhere in floodplains, in the mountains, everywhere actually. And which means that there are certain things that we can learn from tradition, and certain other things that we can combine that with modern technology, and have in some sense, a portfolio of options that people can have, whether it's for water, drinking water, sanitation, education, as Ecological was mentioning. You can have all of this in the floodplain also, but it will have to be, this infrastructure to support that may have to be different. And so that is where I feel that we really need our planners, and engineers, ecologists, social scientists, practitioners, civil society organizations to really work together in order to find some of the solutions to this. This is not going to be easy, but if we don't start doing it now, we are going to face some very difficult times ahead.
Absolutely. Eklavyaji, your thoughts on this aspect? Also, Fayyaz sir, if you were already ready.
Yeah, actually, there's a very popular saying in Bihar, एक पजामा चार भाई फेरा फेरी कचहरी जाए. इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि पजामा एक ही है और चार भाई है, तो एक भाई आया फिर गए. The same approach we are adopting. What Jagdish has clearly suggested, that what happened in Himachal and Uttarakhand, the same model we apply everywhere. For example, for grassland management, I have seen over a period of time that we adopt in central India, Kana is the god. Every parameter are being taken from Kana. Similarly, now we need to see that how altered rainfall regime and altered hydrological cycle creating problem everywhere. government alone cannot decide. It is very, very clear, because it is my land. I have constructed my house on the river bank without understanding what is going to happen. So therefore, that picture need to be portrayed. Now it is high time. We have not learned from Kedarnath incident. What happened this year in Himachal Pradesh, we are not going to learn at all, I tell you. We'll forget everything. Therefore, even we need to see the rationing of land use changes in urban centers. And that is very important. And if government itself is trying to cross all the limit, it is not human beings. Because when you look at the way expressways, highways are being made and we eating away our wetland and riverine floodplain, you cannot consider about it. Nobody's considering, nobody even thinking about it. So similarly, I see that land use changes need to be seen seriously, especially in the area which are facing serious problem, especially high altitude areas. So therefore, people's participation in a limited way, very strict rules and regulation need to be implemented to see that how we can mitigate climate change and find out solution for many other pollutions.
Yes, I think what is important और जो नहीं हो रहा है वो है कि लोगों का क्या परसेप्शन है अबाउट क्लाइमेट चेंज और वो कैसे डिफाइन कर रहे हैं कि उसको हाउ आर दे गेटिंग अफेक्टेड. This entire creation of knowledge is somehow lacking. And when I'm talking about from asking from people, it is basically talking about hardcore impacts. और पिछले कुछ सालों में जैसे अभी फयाज साहब ने भी बताया अभी थोड़े में कि जो हिमाचल में हुआ है, जो केदारनाथ में हुआ था, आप लास्ट ईयर ले लो, व्हाट हैपेंड इन असम. ब्रह्मपुत्र में बाढ़ नहीं आई थी. इट वाज बेसिकली द रिवर्स फ्रॉम द सदर्न पार्ट व्हिच वाज ब्रिंगिंग इन फ्लैश फ्लड्स, एंड दैट टू इन द मंथ ऑफ मे. बिहार में 2021 में, आई थिंक इफ आई एम नॉट मिस्टेकन, 2021 में मई महीने में बाढ़ आई थी. अब अगर जो लोगों ने उसको झेला है उनसे जाके अगर हम पता करेंगे तब हमको समझ आएगा कि किस तरीके से क्लाइमेट चेंजेस के चलते लोग इम्पैक्ट हो रहे हैं. एंड नाउ आई हैव अ वेरी it might sound very awkward, but I have to put it across that कभी-कभी क्या होता है कि अपनी गलतियों को छुपाने के लिए हम क्लाइमेट को ब्लेम कर देते हैं. This happened in 2019 when Patna was floating. Everyone knew as to what was the impact, why Patna got flooded. Everyone knew that. But we were blaming the rain gods for having sent that amount of rain. Whenever there are flash floods, it's always talking about climate change. So my point is that it is definitely happening. I'm not taking away anything from the changing climate and in its impact, and that too at a very decentralized level. But it is also important that we do not lose focus of the fact that, apart from climate change, it's also the human-induced aspects which are bringing about destruction in the entire floodplains. The second thing is that when we know and when there is so much of evidence in terms of impacts due to changing climate, why is it so it's not showing out in our schemes? I mean, we already can easily identify hotspots in each of the states. Forget, we can easily identify hotspots in each of the districts. Are we doing that? Our districts, have they been mapped in terms of which kind of, suppose, say, for instance, एक जिला है, say for instance, खगड़िया, वहां पर कौन-कौन से इलाके ऐसे हैं जहां पर रिवर इरोजन से इम्पैक्ट होता है, वो कौन से इलाके हैं जहां पर फ्लड से इम्पैक्ट होता है, वो कौन से इलाके हैं जहां छोटी नदियों से इम्पैक्ट होता है. We have not done that. So if the system in itself is trying to divert from being nuanced, then this whole argument about climate change, its impact, and what are the solutions or what are the way forwards, it is not going to work, unfortunately. So, I mean, basically, this is what I wanted to say. And if you go back a couple of years, fresh memories are there in terms of what are the changes that are happening. I'll end up by giving you an example. On the 27th of July, I was in the village in Nyatola Bishambarpur. वहां पर महिलाएं कह रही थी कि इस समय जो सिंचाई हुई है वो हम लोगों ने पंप लगा के किया है. And this is a village which is next to the river Gandak. कि हम लोगों ने पंप लगा के किया. And they said, and there is an interview also by Gaon Connection, they said categorically कि अब ऐसा ना हो कि कहीं नेपाल में बहुत जबरदस्त बारिश हो जाए, हम लोग डूब जाएंगे. And on the 9th of August, this exactly happened. So again, coming back to the core of what I was trying to talk about earlier, we need to listen. So, Jagdish ji mentioned about like we need to listen to the rivers. So did Fayaz ji indicated. And I'm saying that when we are talking to the rivers and listening to them, we need to also listen to the riparian communities and the communities staying along the rivers. Otherwise, whatever we do, it will be just a cosmetic thing.
That immediately brings me to the question, how an RFD, a riverfront development project, how does it factor into this system of climate change and the urban perception of how infrastructure should be, how a river should look beautiful? This question is for all the panelists, since this is a pressing issue, since RFDs are coming up at a rapid pace in so many places.
I can just quickly say something and then I'll pass it on to Fayaz and Ecological. So there's no reason why in an urban environment we cannot actually have a functioning river and river ecology being maintained. You look at some of the urban rivers, even the Thames, which was heavily polluted and degraded once upon a time. A lot of the native species have returned to the Thames River. So let us learn from situations where even in urban areas, rivers can be ecological entities and not some channelized, water bodies. Because, urban areas have to play a role in biodiversity conservation and in sustaining our aquatic ecosystem. The burden cannot be placed only on some distant wildlife sanctuary or national park or things like that, right? I mean, urban areas have to also generate ecosystem services. And there is also no reason why a well-maintained floodplain in an urban area can provide recreation. It can provide recreation, it can tourism, it can provide, it can support biodiversity. It can also help prevent catastrophic floods and so on. So we really need to change the way in which we are looking at blue and green infrastructure in cities and towns. And because of 50% of Indians will soon be living in urban areas. And if this is going to be the paradigm of concretizing and channelizing all our water bodies, this will be a big loss of what these rivers and wetlands can actually offer, both for the city as well as for other other communities as well. So I'm going to end here and I'm going to pass it.
Actually, I'd like to add that in a general term, when others are listening, many people are join this talk. Actually, always I say that most of the time, urban centers sees that why people are not interacting with the river. In Delhi also, it's a popular slogan, let's people take to the river. So what we do by thinking in that direction, chalo ek road banate hain nadi tak, pehla vichar aaya. The moment we reached river, let's bring electricity on the embankment. Tab cafeteria banaya. Tab हमने कहा कि चलो नीचे ट्रेल बनाते हैं नदी तक जाने के लिए, और इस तरह से by the time we'll reach to river, that money which was meant for river restoration is finished over. So my suggestion would be that while thinking about river, please start walking from river towards a city, and that will give you a lot of solution. You look at the river main channel, then you come to the floodplain, you look at the sewerage entering into it, then you finally come to the embankment and finding solution for many things. Because why we go to Corbett paying $300 per night? So similarly, wilderness, if you create here in, if you, what do you call, preserve here in urban centers, nobody enjoys. They say, no, 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 selection one, grass, open area, sitting arrangement. We need boating facility. But when we go to Kana, in same wilderness, we pay $300 and stay overnight and we enjoy it. So it is our mindset also need to be changed. And it is not we, actually the system is also not helping to pursue, the way a river should work. The natural phenomena of river can only be protected through learning from river. Our own perception is being put over most of the rivers, looking at that the rivers belong to government. The moment you remove the river from the government, bring to the people, probably little better management practices can prevail, and government can become kind of working as a helping in transfer of technology to the people, and probably then many solutions will come which should be very sustainable.
So we should have people's riverfront development.
You are right.
Okay, can I come in?
Yes.
My point is slightly different than what Jagdish ji and Fayaz Bhai they've mentioned. I would question the fact that these riverfront development, are there actually riverfront development, or there is a hidden agenda? Because what I see of these riverfront is nothing but concrete. Yeah? And the other thing is, in terms of when we talk about beautification, this is the easiest way to fool people. Because, the system doesn't require any inputs to make people sensitive towards the rivers. The best way is to even take them, as Fayaz Bhai was saying, that in Patna, what he saw in front of the river front project was a nala. So if you develop a riverfront and there is a nala, you'll get away with it. But the government or the system has to look into making people sensitive toward the river. So this is a shortcut. And you create that space and everyone is happy. And no one is, talking about it. So for me, this is nothing but a kind of an extension of what we have been seeing of embankments. And I need not mention that embankments is an initiative which has 3 or 4 players. And these 3 and 4 players are always happy. I think so. The similar formula is being now applied in the urban centers. And I'll end up with an example. It was in 2021 that I started walking a tributary of River Damodar in my hometown in Dhanbad. And I started with a trickle, and then I kept on following it, and the trickle started, it started becoming bigger and bigger. And I was very happy that, I'm interacting with a live entity, though it was carrying all the shitload from all the households along with it. And I kept on asking people along the tributary that, is this a tributary? And they were kind of astonished because they did not consider it as a tributary. It was a nala for them because it was easy for them to discharge everything into that nala. So even in a scenario like this, just imagine an idea comes in of a riverfront development. No one would be bothered. No one would be the people would be more happier than seeing the riverfront development rather than talking about the improvement of the river, because that will affect their use. So I think so. It's a very smart strategy that has been developed, bringing in the formula of the embankments, ensuring people are happy because they're getting that space, and nothing is being done for the river because no one wants to touch that. Thank you.
Thank you, Eklavya Dr. Fayaz, Dr. Jagdish. I'd request you to just glance at the question answer box to see if you have any other questions you would like to answer, since we're almost at the end of our session time for tonight. In the meantime, I'd like to share with the audience that this is a webinar series. So we are going to try to get one different subject about the river and what can be done for our rivers to make them ecologically more healthy, more natural, free flowing. So join us in the next month as well. We have just shared all the platforms that you can find our links and information on as part of the Pune River Revival Movement. Many of you might already be aware that the RFT project has begun to be executed in Pune city, and this campaign has come together to find alternatives, to find a way in which this can be stopped and done in a better way. So you could also join us in this campaign by looking at any of the several platforms that we have shared. And is there any other question that the panel would like to answer, or would you like to make a few last statements? Yes, Dr. Eklavya ji.
Yeah, there is a request of showing photographs of the Faidaman Shauchalaya.
Yes.
I just there are 3 slides. If you permit, then I can do that.
Yes, you can share already.
Just 2 minutes.
Meanwhile, others can go through the questions, and if you want to answer any specific question.
Is my slide visible?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
So on the left is the SBMG toilet, and on the right is basically the SBMG toilet and the Faidaman Shauchalaya. And quit this. So this is basically talking about the Faidaman Shauchalaya in different flood typologies. Now this is how it is constructed. This is construction of a Faidaman Shauchalaya in the riverine flood prone area. So it's the entire cycle starting from the Bhumi Pujan by the Didi to the the time when we are using the human manure from the toilets. These are the pans, and all of the work is undertaken by the local masons. And we try to see if the household people from the household are engaged in doing the work. So these are, these are some of the photographs of how, on the right-hand side, you see a couple. So they had the Faidaman Shauchalaya, and this is in the flash flood prone area. They had a temporary superstructure, and after a while now they have a permanent superstructure. And this is how we try to engage people, and we keep on working on the fact that the human manure from the Faidaman Shauchalaya is also used for agriculture. It's like closing the loop. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there any other question that needs to be addressed?
Since most of it was covered, I thought if whatever has not been mentioned or explained, if you could cover that, so that, because it's almost 9 o'clock and I'm sure the experts are also getting late.
I've just shared the YouTube link of this session. So in case you have any doubts that might be answered in the beginning, the audience can go back to that specific point and look at it once again.
Yeah. Also, Shatakshi, I would like to request you both that you can compile those questions and send it across to the experts by email. So they would get back to us, and which can be shared on the group. That will be better, because most of the topics and I know it's a limited time, but still we have tried to cover a lot, I believe, and let's not extend this more. And at the same time, thanking all the experts for immensely making people so interested, so glued to the webinar. I cannot thank you more. So Shatakshi, over to you.
Yes, that should be it. Actually, thank you so much to the entire panel for joining us tonight. And webinars have become a thing of the past when the pandemic ended, but we still have a healthy audience and healthy interaction over here. And hopefully that will also convert into action with all the campaigns that we're trying to run, and getting people to the river, and getting them to understand and know rivers better. So see you all in the next session. And you could find the panelists on different social media platforms as well, and connect with them there. Or if you have a specific question, we can pass it on to them. So thank you. That is all for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.